Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is George Herrera with the Queens Home Team at Keller Williams Realty. Now in today's video, what I'm talking about are the 8 steps to buying a house in Queens, New York. So these are the 8 steps that you can expect if you're planning to buy a property here in Queens. These are the 8 steps that you can expect to encounter along the way up until your contract signing. All right. Now, if you've bought a property in Queens before, most likely you've been through these steps and you probably are familiar. This can still be a refresher, but if you've never bought a property and if you're a first-time home buyer or someone who's on the path to home ownership and thinking about buying in the future, then this should be helpful just to at least give you an idea of the steps that you should be taking and that you will take in your journey towards buying a property here in Queens. All right, so without further ado, step number 1 in buying a house here in Queens, New York is to speak with a lender. I always recommend this. Anyone I speak to, friends, family, kids in their 20s that we know, children of clients, things like that. Anytime I speak to someone who shows an interest in buying a property, the first thing I tell them is to speak with a lender. This is what my wife and I did when we were first thinking of buying a property, and it's really eye-opening. Our listing and transaction manager, Anna Reyes, she just bought a property last year, and 2 years before that, we had her speak with a lender, because it really opens your eyes as to what's possible, what you most likely will be able to afford, and what you need to do within the next couple years or 2 or 3 years in order to get yourself ready to be able to buy. So speak with a lender. We have great people that we work with in our network that give really good advice. They put a lot of people on the path to home ownership, and they're really good at what they do. So they are able to give you a lot of options and guidance in getting ready to buy. So the first thing is really speaking with a lender, and we always suggest submit all your documents. You know, first they'll ask you a lot of questions, and based on your income, your employment history, your credit, your recurring debts, things like that, they'll be able to tell you if it seems likely that you would be able to get approved for a loan. But the best thing to do is to go ahead and submit all your financial documents for a pre-approval and see what you can get pre-approved for. Even if you only get pre-approved for $100,000 or $150,000, it still gives you an amount, and now you know that you're approved for that amount. Now, once you finally speak with a lender, right, and you get a pre-approval, if you can't get pre-approved, then at least your lender should be able to tell you what you need to do in order to get yourself there. So whether it's saving more money down, whether it's staying at your job longer because the employment history is not long enough, whether it's paying off some debts, raising your credit score, whatever the case is, they'll be able to put you on that path to home ownership. And then it's your homework to get it done. Now, if you're able to get pre-approved, now you have a dollar amount that you can work with, right? So if you get pre-approved, then let's say you get pre-approved for $400,000, now you have a budget. You have a budget of $400,000 that you can actually go out there and work with. So that brings us to step number 2. Step number 2 is to get an idea of what things are going for in the areas that you're interested in, right? So if you're looking in Queens, and let's say that you get a pre-approval up to $400,000. Well, now you have a number to work with, and that number will drive the areas, will guide you to the areas where that is a realistic budget, right? So if you're pre-approved for $400,000 for a single family, then something, let's say in Northwest Queens, might be unrealistic, but in South Queens or Southwest Queens, that might be more realistic, right? So, and obviously, you know, this all depends on the different areas, but for a single family house, $400,000 is tough anywhere in Queens, but let's say $500,000. And so either way, once you get pre-approved, that will guide you to the areas that most likely you'll be able to buy in, right? Now, once you start seeing the areas where your budget fits and where you're able to buy a property and where things are listed for around the prices of where your pre-approval matches, then you make the decision of whether that's acceptable for you, and whether those neighborhoods are areas that you're willing to explore and that you might be interested in living in. And you make that decision, and if you do decide that, then you go ahead and you start looking at properties. Or you make the decision that, you know what, I want to be in another area and the prices are much higher, so I need to save more money to put down so that I can actually live in the areas where I want to live, right? So that brings us to step number 3. Step number 3 is decide to buy or wait. So make the decision. And so once you speak with a lender, once you get pre-approved, now you have a dollar amount to work with. That dollar amount will give you, will guide you to the areas in Queens where you'll be able to afford a house, right? So where the properties are going for around the price range of your pre-approval, right? So let's say, for example, you were pre-approved for $500,000, then you would want to be looking at properties in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, maybe $300,000 to $500,000. And when you narrow properties down by that price range, it will show you the areas where that's realistic, right? So once you do that, you make the decision of whether you want to buy or wait. And so that's a decision that you'll make. And then once you make that decision, let's say you decide that the areas where I'd like to live are not realistic based on my current pre-approval, then like I mentioned, you just save more money down, get yourself ready so that come a couple years down the road, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, maybe you can get pre-approved for a higher amount, which matches the price levels of the areas that you're looking in. All right. If you decide to buy, then that brings us to step number 4. Find an agent and then schedule a buyer consultation. Okay, so if you decide, let's say you're pre-approved up to $600,000, and you look around in Queens, you're looking on Trulia or Zillow or whatever app you like to use to search for properties up to $600,000, and you find that it takes you to certain neighborhoods where that's realistic, and you like the areas. You drive by, you take a look, you take a visit. These are areas that you're interested in living in and that you're willing to explore. So now your next step is you want to start looking at properties, right? But before you do that, what you really should do is find an agent and schedule what's called a buyer consultation. This is hugely beneficial, but a lot of people skip this step and they end up seeing way more properties than they need to, seeing a lot of properties that make no sense, and going to see properties in areas that really aren't a good fit for them. So what you do is you contact a few agents. There's many ways of finding an agent, and what you can do to test the agent first is their responsiveness. So check out their websites, submit a contact form, and tell an agent, or 2 or 3 agents if you want to compare, and ask for that you're interested in buying a property and you'd like to schedule a buyer consultation. Now what you can do is, if you do this on the same day, the first test is who is most responsive. So who gets back to you the quickest. This is a good test because as a buyer agent, especially in a competitive market like Queens, response time and responsiveness is hugely important. It's very important in being able to find the right property, jump on it right away, make an offer, negotiate an accepted offer. So response time, you can test it by just visiting a few agent websites, read some reviews, contact them, see how quick they get back to you. Now, once you find an agent that you feel comfortable with, so you would want to talk to them on the phone first and see who you feel comfortable with. Once you find an agent that you feel comfortable with over the phone, go ahead and schedule that in-person buyer consultation, or what people have been doing lately, especially since the pandemic hit, is doing virtual consultations. So you can actually do a Zoom buyer consultation and still accomplish the objective of the buyer consultation, which really the buyer consultation, what it does is give the agent a really good idea of what you're looking for in the house, in the neighborhood, and in terms of lifestyle. And what that does is that between your budget, your needs, your must-haves, and your wish list, and your lifestyle, between those things, when you really dive into a deep conversation with a good buyer consultation, it's going to let the agent know which areas will be able to offer that for you, right? So instead of just going all over the place and seeing 50 properties, it will help your agent narrow down the areas, the properties, and really get it all down. You know, there's thousands of properties on the market. So when you get that down to that nice condensed list, it helps you make the best use of your time. And ideally, you see a property that you love, you make an offer, and then you get to get everything moving forward. All right. So that was step 4. Next step here is step 5. Okay. Step 5 is to start looking at properties. So once you find an agent, you do a buyer consultation, the next step is now you have to get out there and start viewing properties. So what you can do is start visiting open houses. And that's a way that if you know that you're not ready to make offers just yet, if you know that maybe you have that pre-approval, but you're just not there yet, you're not ready to go and start viewing properties and actually start making offers, then what you can do is you can start visiting open houses and getting an idea of what properties look like, what they're going for, track them on Truly or Zillow, see what they end up selling for, or see when they go into contract. And if you do that, it's still helpful to have an agent because you can give their card just in case you decide to make an offer on something. At least you can have your agent on your side to help you make the offer. Okay, so the step number 5 is to start viewing properties. Once you have your agent, your buyer consultation, you narrow down the properties, now you start scheduling appointments to go see the properties. A good agent will be able to schedule them for you, and when you go see the properties, they'll be able to give you a lot of education as you're looking at the houses, right? So homes in Queens are very old. There's a lot of things that you need to know when you're looking at these properties and things you should be paying attention to. So a good agent with a lot of experience will be able to point out a lot of things about the house that you as a first-time buyer will most likely not be aware of, right? So you start viewing properties. That's your 5th step. Now that takes us to step number 6. Step number 6 is to make and negotiate offers. So you started looking at properties, you've been looking at different houses, now you're ready to make an offer. So step number 6 is where you decide, I like the house, I'd like to make an offer, and you work with your agent to write up the offer. You have your pre-approval, you discuss the terms for your offer with your agent, and then your agent helps you to negotiate the price with the listing agent or with the seller. So in this step, what you want to do is have a good agent that has a lot of good negotiating tactics. Okay, if you go directly through a listing agent, then what the main thing you need to be aware of is that they're not working for you, they're working for the seller. So for example, I'm a listing agent. When I'm working with my sellers, if I happen to get a buyer directly that comes to me, my job is to get that buyer as high as possible for my seller. My job is to get that buyer to pay the highest price possible with the best terms possible for my client, who is the seller. The buyer is not my client because the seller hired me. So if a buyer comes through me directly, they're actually a customer, right? So I deal fairly and honestly with them, but my job and my fiduciary duty is to my seller. So you just need to keep this in mind in case you decide to go straight to the listing agents, is that their fiduciary duty and their job is to do everything that's in the best interest of the seller. So if you ask them, what should I offer? The right answer should be full price for a listing agent. Right now, if you have a buyer agent, if you have an agent on your side, then when you see a property that you like, your first step should be, can you please send me comps? Let's look at the comps together. Ask your agent, what do you think this property is worth? What do you think is a good offer to come in at? What do you think is the right negotiation strategy? Are there any terms that we can include that might make the offer more attractive? Can you talk to the listing agent and find out where the sellers are going? Why are they selling? You know, so your agent can work on your behalf and try to help you negotiate the best price possible. So it's the inverse of the listing agent's responsibility. A buyer agent is working on your behalf and in your best interest, and their job is to do anything that can help you negotiate the best price and terms for the purchase, right? So that's step number 6, where you make and negotiate offers. This is often very underlooked, where a lot of buyers in Queens do like to go directly to listing agents, but we've seen many buyers overpay for properties, get terms that are not very favorable for them, and just not get great service throughout the transaction because they went straight to the listing agent, and the listing agent's job is to work for the seller and in their best interest. And so you do sacrifice that when you go directly to the listing agent. And in my opinion, one of the things you want as a buyer when you're looking for a property, what you want are comps. You want comps, you want expertise, you want your agent's opinion so that you can get a second opinion based on them being in the market, right? And you want tactics, you want negotiating tactics. How can we get this deal and how can we work it so that we get the best terms and price possible? So that comes with expertise from a really experienced buyer's agent, and that would be the step number 6, where you're making and negotiating your offers. All right, so step number 7 is where you've negotiated your offer. You found a property, you like it, you made your offer, you negotiated, you went back and forth, and you came to an agreement with the seller. So you have now what's called an acceptable offer or an accepted offer. The next step at this point in Queens is that once you have an accepted offer, you move on to the home inspection. So step number 7 is schedule your home inspection. When you schedule your inspection, usually here in Queens, you want to get that done within 24 to 48 hours. Okay, so we have a saying in our business, time kills deals. And we've seen a lot of buyers lose properties because they take too long to schedule their inspection. So that's one word of advice is if you get an accepted offer, make sure you move quickly to inspection, because you want to get things moving and you want to show the seller and the listing agent that you're serious buyers and that you're moving as quickly as possible. So just let's say, for example, in New Jersey, when you have an accepted offer, it's actually a signed contract which gets accepted. And so it's much more binding than what it is in Queens and in New York City. Here in New York City, when you get an accepted offer, it's essentially just a verbal accepted offer. There's nothing legally binding, and no offer is considered fully accepted until contracts are signed by both the buyer and the seller. So from accepted offer until contract signing, anything goes, anything can happen. And if a higher offer comes in, the seller has the right to entertain it. And so this is where, for home buyers in Queens and in New York City, it can get really stressful. There can be a lot of pressure here because you have to keep that in mind, that when you get an accepted offer, it doesn't necessarily mean it's locked in and you're good. It means that you need to move as quickly as possible so that you can get the property under contract, okay, and avoid losing it. So what you'll do here, you'll schedule your home inspection. You'll your agent, if they're a good agent, should have a list of 2 or 3 inspectors they work with. If they have some that they highly recommend, then you should definitely take their recommendation. If they don't have an inspector to recommend to you, then go ahead and search on Yelp or Google, and you can find a good home inspector. When you go to the home inspection, make sure you follow them along the whole time so that you can learn about the house. And the one thing I would say, keep in mind, houses in Queens are old. A lot of these are built pre-war or mid-century, and so they are older homes. They will always have normal wear and tear. If you aren't buying a new construction property, there will definitely be normal wear and tear. And it's the inspector's job to point out every single thing that's wrong with the house, because they have to err on the side of caution as a home inspector. So just keep in mind that The houses are older, but what you're looking for is major issues. So roof, plumbing, electrical, heating, things that are major components of the home, safety hazards. Those are the things that you want to really keep an eye out. Okay, so don't get scared if there's normal wear and tear throughout the house. Okay, so step 7 was scheduling your home inspection. You want to do that within 24 to 48 hours of getting your accepted offer. Once you receive your report, then you want to review it and go over it with your buyer agent. Your agent will help you there to see what's reasonable. If there's anything that you need to bring up that's unexpected, something major that came up, if you plan to renegotiate, then you can work through that with your buyer agent, and hopefully you can still come to an agreement and keep the deal moving forward. So many times after inspection, we've seen where buyers ask for a lot of repairs or credits or adjustments, and many times it can kill a deal, especially in a competitive market where there's backup offers. And so you want to be just aware of all those factors, and then hopefully, if you're able to review your report, only bring up major things that are very reasonable and that the seller can understand, and you come to an agreement after the inspection and everybody's good to go, ready to move forward into contract, then you go to the final step during, from buying to contract, which step number 8 is going to be hiring your attorney. So here in Queens and New York City, the attorneys don't get involved until after the inspection, or at least that's how our team does it, and most agents will do it this way, is that you'll get the accepted offer, have your inspection, and after the inspection is done, typically the brokers will negotiate any terms after the inspection. If there's anything to be addressed, any items, credits, repairs, things like that, the brokers will negotiate that. And once everything is finalized and everyone's on the same page, then the attorneys get involved. So after everything is negotiated after inspection, then what you want to do is hire your real estate attorney. So our word of advice here is to use a real estate attorney. Our suggestion would not be to use an attorney that is a general practice attorney, or if they specialize in another field. Typically, if you want the smoothest deal possible, you want to find a real estate attorney, and preferably in the neighborhood where you're buying. So if you're in Queens, it'd be good to use a real estate attorney that's in Queens. And if you're in Brooklyn or Manhattan, it's good to use an attorney that's located in your borough, because they'll also be tuned into the way things work in that borough. And believe it or not, things in Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, they all operate differently, right? So you hire your attorney. Your agent, again, becomes a resource. If you have a really good buyer's agent, they're going to have people for you throughout the whole way. So they'll have good lenders that you can speak to. They'll have good inspectors that you can use. They'll have good attorneys that you can talk to. So here you want to also talk to 2 or 3 real estate attorneys. Talk to them over the phone. Ask them what their fees are. Typically in Queens, it'll be a flat fee, so you want to compare, and then find the attorney that you feel the most comfortable with. Once you have your attorney, then the next thing that happens is that the listing agent will send a deal sheet to both attorneys, the seller and buyer attorney, and then the attorneys will start working on the actual contract. Once the contract is finalized and all terms are negotiated and everyone's on the same page, both attorneys, then the buyer's attorney, your attorney, will call you in to come review the contract, sign the contract, and cut a check for the initial escrow deposit, which is typically 10% of the sale price. If you're putting a down payment less than 10%, then typically the seller will want you to put that whole down payment down at the contract signing. But those things you can work out with your agent once you're negotiating the terms for your offer. But that's what'll happen. The attorneys will work on the contract. They'll go back and forth with provisions and changes, and then with proposed revisions, and then your attorney will call you in to review sign, cut a check for the escrow deposit. That half signed contract gets sent over to the seller's attorney, and then the seller's attorney calls the seller in to review and sign the contract. Once the seller signs, you have a fully executed contract, and now you are all good. You are in contract on your first property, and you move on to the next phase, which is contract to closing. And contract to closing, if you're taking a mortgage, will typically take 2 to 3 months in Queens. And that'll be a whole nother video to talk about the things that happen from contract to close. But hopefully this gives you an idea and some things to consider and be aware of if you're thinking of buying a home in the future here in Queens, or if you're in the market now to buy a property in Queens. Then consider these 8 steps and all those different things that I mentioned that you should be aware of in your journey towards buying a property. Okay, hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop us a line. In the description, you'll see a link to our website, queenshometeam.com/help, and you can always send us a question. If you have any ideas or suggestions for other video topics or questions you'd like to answer, please drop them in the comments below, and we'll be sure to shoot a video addressing it for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Take care. Have a great day.